Have you ever been looked right through, treated like a piece of furniture, just because your body doesn't fit society's mold? They called her a whale. They laughed when she put on a tactical vest, claiming they didn't make Kevlar in triple extra large. But while the perfectly sculpted suit-wearing bodyguards were busy checking their reflections in the tinted windows of their SUVs, she was memorizing the exits, tracking the blind spots, and calculating the exact trajectory of a sniper's bullet. This is the true story of a woman ridiculed for her size, who quietly outsmarted the deadliest men in the city to become the untouchable shield and the only weakness of an underground kingpin. The security control room of the Obsidian Lounge was a cramped, windowless bunker buried 2 floors beneath the opulent streets of Boston's Seaport District. It smelled of stale coffee ozone from the server racks and the cheap cologne of the men who inhabited it. In the center of this testosterone-fueled cave sat Amelia Hastings. At 5'9" and weighing 260 pounds, Amelia was a stark contrast to the rest of the security detail. The men employed by Roman Caldwell's syndicate were almost uniformly ex-military or former private military contractors, lean, hyper-muscular men with tactical haircuts and custom-tailored suits. Amelia wore standard-issue black cargo pants that chafed at her inner thighs, and a black polo shirt that clung uncomfortably to the soft rolls of her stomach. She was the graveyard shift analyst, the invisible eye in the sky, and the favorite punchline of the day shift. "Hey, Hastings," sneered Johnson, a square-jawed operative whose muscles seemed ready to burst through his Brioni jacket. "You sure that chair's rated for commercial use? Don't want you bringing the whole operation down if one of those casters gives out." A chorus of low chuckles rippled through the room. Amelia didn't turn around. She kept her eyes glued to the bank of 48 high-definition monitors, illuminating her round, pale face. "The chair is fine, Johnson," Amelia said, her voice a calm, flat monotone that she had perfected over years of enduring the world's casual cruelty. "You should be more concerned about camera 4 in the VIP lounge. The panning motor is sticking, leaving a 3-second blind spot near the service elevator." Johnson scoffed, adjusting the Rolex Submariner on his thick wrist. "I don't need a lecture on security from the girl who gets winded walking to the vending machine. Just keep your eyes on the screens and let the real men handle the floor." Amelia ignored him. She was used to being underestimated. Society had taught her early on that a fat woman was either invisible or a target for ridicule. But Amelia had weaponized her invisibility. Because nobody looked at her, she was free to look at everyone else. She observed the micro-expressions of the high rollers, tracked the synchronized movements of the cocktail waitresses, and memorized the tactical layout of every room Roman Caldwell owned. She had a brilliant analytical mind, housed in a body that the world deemed unworthy. Roman Caldwell was not a man who tolerated failure. At 34, he had ruthlessly consolidated power over the eastern seaboard's illicit shipping and underground gambling rings. He was an enigma, cold, calculating, and striking with sharp features and eyes the color of winter ice. He operated with the precision of a surgeon, and his enemies generally ended up in the deep waters of the Massachusetts Bay. Tonight, Roman was expected at the Obsidian Lounge for a high-stakes sit-down with the remnants of the Sullivan family, an Irish mob faction he was strong-arming into submission. At 11:45 p.m., Roman's motorcade, 3 black Cadillac Escalades, pulled into the underground loading dock. Amelia watched the monitors intensely. Johnson and his superior Simon Fletcher, the head of security, formed a diamond formation around Roman as he stepped out of the center vehicle. Amelia leaned closer to her screens, her heart rate ticking upward. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up multiple angles of the corridor leading to the VIP room. The diamond formation was sloppy. Simon was walking too far ahead, leaving Roman's left flank exposed near the structural pillars. "Control to ground," Amelia spoke into her headset, her voice tight. "Simon, tighten the formation. You have a gap on the left, the blind spot near Pillar 6. Static crackled in her ear before Simon's voice hissed back. "Shut up and stay off the comms, Hastings. I know how to walk my boss to a table." Amelia's jaw clenched. She switched her attention to the service corridors. Waiters were moving back and forth, carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. But something was wrong. On monitor, 12, a busboy in a pristine white jacket, was walking too stiffly. His right arm was pinned tight to his side, restricting the natural sway of his gait. He was carrying something heavy under his coat. Amelia cross-referenced his face with the employee database on her secondary monitor. No match. "He's not a busboy," Amelia whispered. She mashed the emergency override button on her console. Code red. "Simon the waiter coming out of service. Door B is armed gun. I don't see anything. Hastings, stop jamming the frequency." Simon started, but Amelia didn't wait. She ripped her headset off, grabbed her heavy maglite and her issued Smith & Wesson M&P 9mm, and bolted from the control room. For all the jokes about her weight, Amelia moved with a shocking, terrifying momentum. She was a heavy object in motion, driven by a surge of pure adrenaline. She burst through the fire doors just as Roman's detail entered the main hallway. Ahead of them, the fake busboy stepped out of the service alcove. The man reached inside his jacket, drawing a suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5K submachine gun. Simon and Johnson were too slow, their reactions dulled by arrogance. They reached for their holsters, but the assailant already had the weapon raised, the barrel tracking directly toward Roman Caldwell's chest. Roman froze, his ice-blue eyes locking onto the muzzle of the gun. Bang! Amelia hit the hallway like a freight train. She didn't have time to aim. She didn't have time to warn them. She only had her mass. She launched her entire 260-pound frame forward, throwing herself between Roman and the shooter, just as the first suppressed rounds spat from the barrel. One bullet grazed her thick upper arm, a searing stripe of fire, but she didn't stop. Amelia slammed into the assassin with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact was devastating. The much smaller man was lifted off his feet, the submachine gun firing wildly into the ceiling plaster as Amelia crushed him against the marble wall. She used her full body weight to pin him her heavy thigh, driving into his knee until something snapped with a sickening crunch. The man screamed, dropping the weapon. Amelia didn't hesitate. She brought the heavy metal butt of her maglite down against his temple. The assassin went limp, sliding to the floor beneath her. For a long, agonizing second, the hallway was dead silent, save for Amelia's heavy, ragged breathing and the hiss of a ruptured overhead light. She slowly pushed herself up her arm, dripping blood onto the pristine white marble. She looked over her shoulder. Simon and Johnson had finally drawn their weapons, their faces pale and mouths agape. Roman Caldwell stood perfectly still. He slowly lowered his hands, his eyes moving from the unconscious hitman on the floor to the large, bleeding, heavy-set woman who had just saved his life. He looked at her, not with disgust, or pity, or mockery. For the first time in Amelia's life, a man looked at her with absolute, undivided respect. "Who?" Roman asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed off the marble walls. "The hell are you?" "Her name is Amelia Hastings, boss. She's just a basement rat." "An analyst," Simon Fletcher stammered, hurriedly holstering his weapon and stepping between Roman and Amelia. She got lucky. The shooter was an amateur. I had it under control. Roman's gaze slowly shifted to his head of security. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You had it under control, Simon." "My left flank was exposed. You ignored a radio warning, and an armed man got within 15 feet of me. The only thing you had under control was your own incompetence. Simon flushed a deep, angry red. Sir, with all due respect, she broke protocol. She saved my life. Roman cut him off, stepping around Simon to stand directly in front of Amelia. He was tall, well over 6 feet, smelling of expensive tobacco and gunpowder. He looked down at the blood soaking the sleeve of her polo shirt. You took a bullet? Amelia swallowed hard, trying to slow her racing heart. She could feel the stares of the other guards boring into her back. It's a graze, Mr. Caldwell. Negligible damage. The target is subdued. Roman studied her face. He noted the sweat beading on her forehead, the lack of makeup, the practical messy bun her hair was tied in, and the sharp, intelligent fire in her dark eyes. You saw him on the monitors? Yes, sir. Asymmetric gait, right arm pinned. He wasn't in the employee database. And you tried to warn my detail? Yes, sir. Roman turned back to Simon. Effective immediately. Hastings is transferred from the basement. She's on my personal detail. Tier 1. The hallway erupted in stifled gasps. Simon's eyes widened in horror. Boss, you can't be serious. Look at her. She can't pass the physical requirements for Tier 1. She's a liability on the street. She's... Simon struggled for the right word, his eyes darting to Amelia's heavy hips and thick waist. Not built for this line of work. Roman stepped so close to Simon that the head of security had to tilt his head back. She took down an armed assassin while you were checking your cufflinks. Do not question me again, Simon. Have a medic look at her arm, outfit her with Tier 1 gear, and I want her in my vehicle tomorrow morning. The next few weeks were a living hell for Amelia. If the day shift had mocked her before the Tier 1 detail actively tried to destroy her. The inner circle of a Mafia syndicate is an apex predator environment, and the men viewed Amelia as a weak, fat gazelle dumped into their den. They initiated a brutal campaign of psychological and physical hazing. When Amelia reported to the private armory for her new gear, the quartermaster handed her a tactical vest that was 2 sizes too small. Sorry, sweetheart. He laughed, leaning against the chain-link cage of the weapons lockup. We don't stock maternity sizes. Maybe lay off the pastries. Amelia didn't argue. She took the vest back to her small, sparse apartment in South Boston. She spent the entire night cutting the heavy nylon straps, sewing in reinforced extensions, using industrial Kevlar thread, and modifying the internal pockets to hold custom Level 4 ceramic trauma plates she bought with her own savings. By morning, the vest fit perfectly over her curves, providing maximum coverage without restricting her movement. During range training, Johnson and the others would intentionally bump her, trying to ruin her aim. They forced her to run the tactical obstacle course over and over, hoping her weight would cause her to collapse. Amelia didn't collapse. Her lungs burned, her heavy legs felt like lead, and sweat soaked through her tactical gear, but she possessed a stubborn, immovable will. She recognized that her size meant she couldn't run as fast as Johnson, but she also realized her weight gave her an anchor. When firing the heavy, fully automatic weapons that the syndicate favored, the recoil barely moved her. She planted her thick legs, squared her broad shoulders, and fired with terrifying, unshakable precision. She consistently shot the tightest groupings in the detail. Simon watched her progress with venomous hatred. He began intentionally feeding her bad schedules, hoping she would miss a security briefing and give him an excuse to fire her. But Amelia was a step ahead. She hacked into Simon's private server, downloading the master itinerary directly to her phone. She also began analyzing the syndicate's broader security protocols. Sitting in the passenger seat of Roman's armored Mercedes G-Wagon, Amelia spent hours poring over blueprints, patrol logs, and financial ledgers related to the security budget. Roman noticed. He noticed that since Amelia had joined his detail, the ambient chatter in the cars had died down. The other men were uncomfortable around her, but Roman found her silence soothing. She was always watching. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as they sat parked outside a warehouse down by the docks, Roman broke the silence. "They treat you like dirt," Roman said, not looking at her. His eyes fixed on the rain hitting the windshield. Amelia paused, her finger resting on her tablet screen. "It's an occupational hazard, Mr. Caldwell. Men with egos the size of buildings generally don't like it when the architecture shifts." A small, rare smile touched the corner of Roman's mouth. "Why do you stay? With your analytical skills, you could work corporate security, earn a legitimate, comfortable living without taking bullets for a criminal." Amelia looked down at her hands. They were thick, calloused, and scarred. "Corporate security wants people who look good in a lobby. They want optics. You want results. Out here the bullets don't care how much I weigh, and for the first time in my life, someone is paying me for my brain and my loyalty, not judging me for my dress size." Roman slowly turned his head to look at her. The dim light of the street lamp illuminated the soft curve of her jaw and the fierce intensity in her eyes. "Simon wants you gone." "Simon is a fool," Amelia said bluntly. She swiped a file on her tablet and handed it to Roman. "And he's stealing from you." Roman's eyes narrowed. He took the tablet. "I audited the security expenditures for the past 6 months. Amelia explained, her tone purely professional. "Simon has been requisitioning funds for 30 men on the perimeter details for the Southside drops. But if you cross-reference the shift logs with the GPS data from their company phones, there are only ever 20 men on site. He's ghosting 10 paychecks a week and pocketing the cash." Roman stared at the data. It was undeniable. The betrayal was clear, documented, and handed to him by the woman his men mocked mercilessly. "Why bring this to me now?" Roman asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Because," Amelia said, meeting his ice-blue gaze without flinching, "tomorrow is the summit with the Sullivans at the Navy Yard. Simon is in charge of the perimeter. If he's cutting corners to line his pockets, your flank is exposed. And I am not going to let you die because your head of security is a greedy idiot." The tension in the car was palpable. Roman handed the tablet back. He didn't yell. He didn't reach for his gun. He just looked at Amelia, really looked at her, and realized that beneath the soft exterior and the heavy frame was a woman forged of absolute iron. "Don't tell anyone else about this," Roman commanded softly. "We go to the Navy Yard tomorrow as planned. We see how this plays out." The Boston Navy Yard was a graveyard of rusted maritime history, a maze of shipping containers, massive steel cranes, and dilapidated warehouses sitting on the edge of the freezing harbor. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. It was also the perfect place for a massacre. Roman's motorcade arrived just as the sun began to set, casting long skeletal shadows across the concrete. The wind coming off the water was bitter, biting through the thick coats of the security detail. Amelia stepped out of the lead vehicle, the heavy plates of her custom vest hugging her torso. Her hand hovered near the grip of the Sig Sauer P226, holstered on her thigh. She scanned the environment. It was too quiet. "Perimeter is secure, boss," Simon Fletcher announced over the comms, standing a few yards away, his collar pulled up against the wind. "My guys have the rooftops and the main gate. The Sullivans are waiting inside Warehouse 4. Amelia's eyes darted upward. She looked at the rusted catwalks of the adjacent buildings. "I don't see our snipers on the east roof, Simon," she said into the radio. "They're in position. Hastings, stop playing armchair general," Simon snapped back. Roman walked toward the massive corrugated steel doors of Warehouse 4, flanked by Johnson and two other guards. Amelia fell into step directly behind Roman, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every instinct, honed by years of quiet observation, was screaming at her. The angles were wrong. The shadows were too deep. As Roman reached out to pull the heavy chain that opened the warehouse door, Amelia noticed a tiny flash of light from the darkness of a stacked container unit 50 yards to their right. It wasn't a reflection. It was the glare of a scope. "Contact, right sniper!" Amelia roared. Before anyone else could react, Amelia lunged forward. She grabbed Roman by the collar of his heavy wool coat and yanked him backward with a surge of brutal adrenaline-fueled strength. A high-caliber round tore through the empty air where Roman's head had been a fraction of a second before sparking violently against the steel door. The deafening crack of the rifle echoed across the yard, instantly followed by the deafening roar of automatic gunfire erupting from 3 different directions. It was a kill box. "Ambush!" Johnson screamed, drawing his weapon, but he was instantly cut down, his body jerking as rounds tore into his chest. Panic consumed the detail. The men who had mocked Amelia for weeks scattered like terrified children, seeking cover behind the vehicles as the Sullivans' men poured out from behind the shipping containers, laying down a devastating field of crossfire. Roman hit the wet concrete, drawing his own weapon. "Simon suppressing fire, get us out of here!" he yelled into his radio. There was no answer. Amelia glanced toward where Simon had been standing. He was gone. He had retreated to the rear perimeter before the first shot was fired. "He sold us out!" Amelia yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off the concrete around them, kicking up chips of stone. "Simon gave them our positions. We have no perimeter." They were pinned down behind a rusted forklift, the metal sparking and groaning as it absorbed the incoming barrage. 2 more of Roman's men went down in pools of blood. "We need to reach the armored escalade," Roman shouted, firing methodically into the darkness, dropping an advancing shooter. "It's 30 yards. We'll never make it. They have the high ground." Amelia analyzed the angles instantly. "There's a blind spot. Behind the crane housing. It leads to the maintenance tunnels. It's a bottleneck. If we get pinned in there, we're dead. If we stay here, we're dead in 30 seconds, Amelia countered. A heavy machine gun opened up from the catwalk above, tearing the forklift apart. The metal cover was failing. "Go," Amelia commanded. She didn't wait for his approval. Amelia stood up, her massive frame stepping out of the cover. She became the ultimate, undeniable target. She raised her weapon, laying down a fierce, precise, suppressing fire, forcing the attackers to duck. "Move, Roman!" she screamed. Roman sprinted toward the crane housing. Amelia backed up, acting as a human wall between him and the shooters. A bullet slammed into her back. The kinetic energy felt like being kicked by a horse. Her custom level 4 ceramic plate caught the round, but the sheer force knocked the wind out of her lungs. She stumbled her heavy boots, scraping the concrete, but she used her thick legs to dig in, refusing to fall. She absorbed the blow, righted herself, and kept firing. "Amelia!" Roman yelled from the edge of the tunnel entrance. She turned and ran toward him. Another shot rang out. This one caught her in the fleshy part of her thigh, missing the bone but tearing through muscle. Amelia let out a grunt of pain, her leg buckling. She hit the ground hard, her weight slamming onto the wet pavement. The Sullivans' men saw her fall and broke cover, rushing forward to finish the job. Roman didn't run. The ruthless Mafia boss, the man who left men to die without a second thought, stepped out from the tunnel cover. He grabbed Amelia by the straps of her heavy tactical vest, bracing his boots against the concrete, and pulled. Together, using her remaining strength and his desperate leverage, They dragged her heavy frame behind the thick concrete barrier of the crane, housing just as the ground where she had fallen was chewed to dust by automatic fire. Amelia lay on her back, panting heavily, blood soaking the leg of her cargo pants. Roman knelt over her, his hands frantically pressing against her thigh to stem the bleeding. His usually perfect cold exterior was shattered. His hands were shaking. "You crazy, stupid woman!" He breathed, his ice-blue eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "You stepped out in the open." I am a very large target, Mr. Caldwell." Amelia gasped, offering a weak, pained smile. "It's simple physics. They shoot at the biggest object. It gave you time." Roman stared at her, the reality of what she had done washing over him. The men who looked the part, the muscular, arrogant soldiers, had either died instantly or run like cowards. The woman they called a whale, the woman who had been bullied and overlooked, had just used her own body as a shield to keep him breathing. "You're not dying in a maintenance tunnel, Hastings," Roman growled, pulling her arm over his shoulder. He hauled her to her feet, taking the brunt of her considerable weight. "We're getting out of here, and when we do, Simon Fletcher is going to beg for a quick death." Leaning heavily against the Mafia boss, her blood mixing with the rainwater, Amelia gripped her weapon. The invisible wall had fallen. She wasn't just the fat girl in the basement anymore. She was Roman Caldwell's shield, and heaven help anyone who tried to break her. The maintenance tunnels beneath the Boston Navy Yard were a labyrinth of rusted pipes, stagnant water, and suffocating darkness. Roman Caldwell, the undisputed king of the eastern seaboard's underworld, waded through calf-deep, freezing sludge, his arm wrapped tightly around Amelia's waist. He was carrying a significant portion of her 260-pound frame. His tailored coat ruined his breathing heavy, but his grip never faltered. "Keep moving, Hastings." Roman grunted, his voice echoing off the damp brick. "Just 100 more yards to the secondary extraction point. Do not close your eyes." "I'm awake, boss," Amelia rasped, her voice strained. Every step sent a shockwave of agony radiating from the gunshot wound in her right thigh. Blood had soaked entirely through her heavy cargo pants, leaving a dark, slick trail in their wake. Her chest throbbed violently, where the sniper's armor-piercing round had slammed into her custom Level 4 ceramic plate, undoubtedly fracturing ribs beneath the Kevlar. Yet her mind remained terrifyingly clear. Simon compromised the primary frequencies. "Don't use your phone. He'll have a Stingray interceptor pinging our cell towers." Roman let out a dark, appreciative chuckle, despite the grim situation. "You've got a hole in your leg, and you're giving me a lecture on signal security." "Just doing my job, Mr. Caldwell." They reached a heavy iron grate leading out to a derelict service road on the edge of the harbor. Roman pushed it open, hauling Amelia up onto the wet asphalt. Hidden inside a dilapidated corrugated steel lockup 30 feet away was an unmarked, armored Audi RS6, a ghost car kept off the syndicate's official ledgers for emergencies, precisely like this. Roman shoved Amelia into the passenger seat, tearing open the medical kit in the center console to toss her a tourniquet and a package of quick-clot combat gauze. He slammed the car into gear, the twin-turbo V8 roaring to life, and they tore out of the Navy Yard into the stormy Boston night. 40 minutes later, they descended into the basement of a discreet, unremarkable brownstone in Charlestown. This was the domain of Dr. Harrison Reed, a former trauma surgeon whose gambling debts had led him to trade his license for the lucrative, dangerous work of patching up bullet-riddled mobsters with no questions asked. Harrison took one look at Roman covered in blood, and the massive woman slumped over his shoulder and immediately cleared his stainless steel operating table. "Gunshot to the right thigh, through and through." Roman barked, his usual cold composure replaced by a fierce, frantic energy. "And a high-caliber kinetic impact to the chest plate. Get an IV in her. Now." Amelia was laid back onto the cold metal. As Harrison cut away her blood-soaked pant leg to reveal the jagged exit wound, Roman stood in the corner of the sterile room, refusing to leave. He watched as the doctor unbuckled the heavy tactical vest Amelia had painstakingly modified. When the vest came off, Harrison lifted her black polo shirt to assess the chest trauma. Roman stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. Covering the center of her pale, soft stomach and chest was a horrifying purple-black contusion the size of a dinner plate. The sheer kinetic energy of the sniper round would have shattered the ribcage and ruptured the heart of a smaller, thinner person. Amelia's mass combined with the ceramic plate had absorbed and dissipated the shockwave, saving her life. She wasn't weak. Her body was a fortress. Harrison worked quickly, flushing the leg wound with saline and packing it tightly. Amelia didn't scream. She squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edges of the operating table, swallowing the pain with the same quiet dignity she had used to swallow the insults of Roman's men. "She's lucky," Harrison muttered, threading a curved needle to suture the torn muscle. It missed the femoral artery by an inch. 2 cracked ribs from the blunt force trauma. She needs bed rest. A week minimum. "I don't have a week," Amelia wheezed, opening her eyes to look at Roman. Her face was pale, glistening with a cold sweat. "Simon has the Sullivan family backing him. They have our patrol routes, our safe house locations, and the operational ledgers. By tomorrow morning, Colin Sullivan will initiate a hostile takeover of the seaport shipping lanes." Roman stepped up to the edge of the table, looking down at her. He reached out his long, aristocratic fingers, gently brushing a damp strand of hair away from her face. It was an intimately tender gesture that belonged nowhere near a Mafia bloodbath. "I will handle Colin Sullivan," Roman said softly. "And I will find Simon." "You can't do it blindly," Amelia countered, her voice gaining strength. "You don't know the digital infrastructure. I built the back doors into Simon's servers. I know how he moves his money. You need me." Roman studied her. He looked at the blood, the bruising, and the unyielding steel in her dark eyes. The men he had hired for their muscle had broken and run. This woman, mocked for her size, had stood like a titan in the crossfire. "Harrison." Roman commanded, not taking his eyes off Amelia. "Pump her full of whatever painkillers you have that won't dull her mind. Give her crutches." He leaned closer to Amelia, his voice dropping to a low, rough whisper. "You are no longer an analyst, Hastings. Effective right now, you are the head of my security. You are my second in command. Now tell me how we got the rat." 2 days later, the atmosphere inside Roman's emergency command center, a heavily fortified penthouse overlooking the back bay, was electric with tension. Only the men who had proven their absolute loyalty during the purge of Simon's remaining loyalists were allowed inside. At the center of the room, sitting at a massive mahogany dining table, repurposed as a tactical desk, was Amelia. Her right leg, heavily bandaged and braced, was propped up on a velvet chair. She had swapped her ruined tactical gear for black sweatpants and an oversized black sweater. A pair of crutches leaned against the table. She looked thoroughly out of place among the heavily armed, suit-wearing enforcers, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. When Amelia spoke, the room fell dead silent. Her fingers flew across the backlit keyboard of her customized Alienware laptop, multiple screens reflecting in her eyes. "Simon is smart, but he's arrogant," Amelia explained to the room, her voice steady and authoritative. "He wiped the syndicate's Cayman accounts and routed the cash through a series of shell companies in Panama. He thinks he scrubbed his digital footprint." Roman stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on the back of her chair. It was a subtle claim, a physical manifestation of his complete trust in her. "But you found him 3 months ago, When I first noticed the discrepancies in the payroll ledgers, I didn't just audit his files. Amelia said, a sharp, dangerous smile playing on her lips. I slipped a zero-day exploit into his encrypted two-factor authentication app. Every time he checks his offshore balances, it pings a hidden server I set up in Iceland. She hit the enter key with a satisfying clack. A satellite map materialized on the primary monitor, zooming in rapidly on a location 20 miles outside of Boston. A blinking red dot pulsed over a concrete tarmac. "Got him," Amelia announced. "He's at Hanscom Field, Hangar 4. He's chartered a private Gulfstream jet. Flight plan filed for Buenos Aires, taking off in exactly 45 minutes. Roman straightened up, his ice-blue eyes turning lethal. He drew his custom 1911 pistol, checking the chamber. "Suit up. We're going to the airport." "I'm coming with you," Amelia said, grabbing her crutches and struggling to stand. Roman looked at her braced leg. "You're in no condition to clear a hangar, Amelia. You did your job. Let me do mine." Amelia planted her crutches firmly on the hardwood floor, pulling herself up to her full height. Even injured, she was an imposing figure, her broad shoulders squared. "He humiliated me for months, Mr. Caldwell. He endangered your life because he thought I was too fat, too slow, and too stupid to stop him. I am the head of your security. I don't lead from the rear." Roman held her gaze for a long moment, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a smirk. "Put her in the command SUV," he ordered his men. "Get her a comms headset." The rain was coming down in sheets as the 3 black SUVs smashed through the chain-link perimeter fence of Hanscom Field. They bypassed the main terminal, entirely tearing across the wet tarmac toward Hangar 4, where the sleek, white fuselage of a Gulfstream GR550 was warming up its engines, whining. Simon Fletcher was standing near the boarding stairs, an umbrella held over his head by a mercenary barking orders at the ground crew, loading metal cases of cash into the cargo hold. Roman's vehicles screeched to a halt, boxing the plane in. The doors flew open, and Roman's loyalists poured out, assault rifles raised. The mercenaries hired by Simon took one look at the overwhelming firepower and immediately dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. They were paid to protect, not to die for a lost cause. Simon froze the umbrella, dropping from his hands, as Roman stepped out of the lead vehicle, his expression cold as the grave. "Flight's cancelled, Simon," Roman said, his voice carrying easily over the roar of the jet engines. Simon took a step back toward the stairs, his eyes darting frantically for an escape route. "Roman, listen to me. We can make a deal. I have $30 million in those cases. Take it all, just let me get on the plane." "The money is already mine," Roman replied smoothly. "And you don't have anything I want to buy." The side door of the command SUV opened. Simon watched in absolute horror as a massive, heavy-set woman awkwardly swung herself out of the vehicle, leaning heavily on a pair of aluminum crutches. She was wearing a bulky sweater and sweatpants, her hair a messy bun, the rain instantly soaking her. Amelia Hastings limped forward, the rubber tips of her crutches squeaking against the wet asphalt. She moved slowly, agonizingly, until she stood a few feet to the left of Roman. She reached into her waistband, pulling her Sig Sauer P226, resting the heavy barrel over the handle of her right crutch to stabilize it. Simon's face twisted in disgust. "You brought the whale. You let this basement rat take my job." Amelia didn't flinch at the insult. It had no power over her anymore. "Hello, Simon," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "I audited your flight plan. The payload is too heavy. You're not going anywhere." Simon let out a desperate, unhinged laugh. "You think you're untouchable now, Hastings, because you took a bullet. You're still just a fat joke playing dress-up in a tactical vest." He reached toward his jacket, intending to draw his weapon in a final suicidal blaze of glory. He never even touched the grip. Amelia didn't hesitate. She didn't warn him. She simply squeezed the trigger. The gunshot cracked like thunder across the tarmac. The 9mm hollow point round shattered Simon's right kneecap instantly. Simon screamed a high, piercing sound of absolute agony as his leg buckled beneath him. He crashed to the wet pavement, clutching his ruined knee, writhing in the puddles of jet fuel and rainwater. Amelia calmly lowered her weapon, keeping the safety off. She looked down at the man who had tormented her, her face an unreadable mask of absolute authority. "I remember you telling me I wasn't built for this line of work," Amelia said, her voice ringing out cold and clear over Simon's pathetic sobbing. "You were right. I'm not built to run away. I'm built to stand my ground." She turned her head slightly to look at Roman. The Mafia boss was staring at her with an intensity that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It was a look of pure, unadulterated devotion. "He's all yours, boss," Amelia said. Roman stepped forward, drawing his 1911. He looked down at his former head of security, but his words were meant for the entire underworld to hear. "You betrayed my family, but worse than that, Simon, you disrespected my shield." Roman raised his weapon, ending the reign of the traitor with a single deafening shot. As the echo faded into the rainy night, Roman turned his back on the body. He walked over to Amelia, gently taking her weapon from her hand and tucking it into his own waistband. Without a word, he slipped his arm around her thick waist, taking the weight off her crutches, and helped her limp back to the safety of the armored vehicle. 6 months had passed since the blood-soaked tarmac at Hanscom Field. In that time, the hierarchy of Boston's underworld had been violently and irrevocably rewritten. Roman Caldwell was still the undisputed king, but the streets whispered a new, undeniable truth. Amelia Hastings was the heavy iron gate guarding his throne. The men who had once laughed at her size now lowered their eyes when she walked into a room. Amelia had ruthlessly purged the syndicate of Simon's remaining loyalists, restructuring the security apparatus with military precision. She replaced the arrogant, muscle-bound sycophants with quiet, deadly professionals who valued situational awareness over biceps, and she commanded them with an absolute, chilling authority. But behind the reinforced oak doors of Roman's private penthouse, the dynamic between the Mafia boss and his head of security had evolved into something far deeper and infinitely more dangerous. It was 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday. The city below was a sprawling grid of amber streetlights. Amelia sat on the edge of Roman's massive leather sofa, a thick stack of shipping manifests resting on her lap. She was dressed down a soft grey Henley, stretching over her full chest and black leggings that hugged her thick thighs. Roman poured 2 glasses of expensive Macallan, 25-year-old Scotch, walking over to hand her one. He didn't sit in the armchair across from her. Instead, he sat right beside her, his thigh pressing deliberately against hers. "Colin Sullivan is bleeding cash." Amelia noted her eyes scanning the tablet screen. "We strangled his supply lines at the port. His lieutenants are getting restless. He's going to make a desperate move." Roman took the tablet from her hands, tossing it onto the coffee table. He turned to face her, his ice-blue eyes softening in a way the rest of the world never saw. "Enough business, Amelia." He reached out his long fingers, gently tracing the collar of her shirt, brushing against the slight indentation where the sniper's bullet had fractured her ribs months ago. Amelia's breath hitched. Despite her commanding presence in the streets in these quiet moments with Roman, she still battled the ghosts of a lifetime of insecurity. "Roman," she whispered, her cheeks flushing. "I'm not." "Don't," Roman interrupted softly, his hand moving to cup her jaw. He leaned in his gaze, dropping to her lips. "Don't you dare insult the woman I love." Amelia froze, her dark eyes widening. "Love, you think I keep you here just because you can read a room?" Roman asked, a fierce intensity burning in his voice. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by hollow men and plastic women who would sell me out for $1. You stepped in front of a bullet for me. You dragged me out of a kill box. You built a fortress around my life." He moved closer, his hand sliding down to rest intimately on her heavy waist, pulling her solid frame against his lean, muscular one. "The rest of the world is blind, Amelia. They look at you and see a woman who doesn't fit in their little magazines. I look at you and see an absolute goddess. You are my equal, my shield, my queen." When he kissed her, it wasn't a gentle, tentative thing. It was a claiming. It was the fierce, protective passion of a man who had finally found the one solid, unmovable force in his chaotic world. Amelia melted into him, her strong hands gripping his shoulders, allowing herself for the first time in her life to be entirely seen and entirely desired. But their sanctuary was about to be shattered. The next morning, Colin Sullivan made his play. Recognizing he could not defeat Amelia's tactical superiority in a street war, Colin utilized his final asset, a corrupt FBI special agent named Wyatt Mitchell. Mitchell had been on the Sullivan payroll for a decade, and Colin called in his marker to orchestrate a devastating trap. Agent Mitchell contacted Roman's legal team, requesting a discreet off-the-books parley at the Copley Plaza Hotel under the guise of discussing a federal plea deal regarding the Port Territories. Roman, confident in his political leverage, agreed to attend. "I don't like this, boss," Amelia said, as they stood in the underground garage preparing the motorcade. "Mitchell is federal, but the Copley Plaza is too public. There are too many variables, too many blind spots in a civilian hotel." "It's a public space, Amelia. Mitchell won't risk a federal shootout in the lobby," Roman reasoned, adjusting his tie. "You have the perimeter locked down. I'll be in and out in 20 minutes. Amelia's gut churned. "I'm putting an earpiece on you. If I say the word, you walk out. You don't hesitate." Roman smiled softly, touching her cheek. "I trust you with my life." Roman entered the Copley Plaza, flanked by 4 of Amelia's best Tier 1 operatives. Amelia remained in the Mobile Command SUV, parked 2 blocks away, her eyes glued to the hacked security feeds of the hotel. Roman took the elevator to the 5th-floor conference room. Agent Mitchell was waiting, but as Roman walked through the double doors, Amelia saw something on camera 3 that made her blood run cold. The bellhop standing near the service elevator wasn't wearing standard-issue shoes. He was wearing tactical combat boots. "Roman, it's a trap," Amelia screamed into her headset. "Hostiles on the 5th floor. Evacuate." But before Roman could react, the heavy oak doors of the conference room slammed shut and locked from the outside. On her monitors, Amelia watched in horror as the hotel's fire alarm suddenly blared, plunging the building into automated lockdown. The elevator banks froze. At that exact second, a heavily armored strike team mercenaries hired by Colin Sullivan rappelled down the side of the Copley Plaza, smashing through the glass windows of the 5th-floor conference room. Roman's guards drew their weapons, but they were vastly outgunned. The feed cut to static in a barrage of stun grenades and automatic fire. Amelia slammed her fists onto the console, her breathing ragged. She rapidly switched to the external traffic cameras. 2 minutes later, she saw a heavy-duty laundry truck speeding out of the hotel's loading dock. "They took him," Amelia said, her voice dropping to a terrifying dead calm. She turned to Johnson, who was sitting in the driver's seat, his face pale. "They grabbed the boss," Johnson stammered. "Hastings, what do we do? We have to call the families. We have to shut up. Amelia commanded her mind, processing data at light speed. She pulled up the city's grid, tracking the laundry truck's GPS via the city's automated toll cameras. The vehicle was heading toward the abandoned Everett Marine Terminal, a desolate stretch of rusted shipping cranes and derelict warehouses on the edge of the Mystic River. Johnson mobilized the entire armory. Every man we have, Amelia ordered, reaching into the back seat to grab her custom-tailored tactical rig. She strapped the heavy ceramic plates over her chest, the Velcro screaming in the quiet car. She locked a 30-round magazine into her M4 carbine. They think they just cut the head off the snake, Amelia said, a dark, lethal fire burning in her eyes. They forgot about the shield. The Everett Marine Terminal was a graveyard of industrial steel, battered by freezing rain and howling wind. Inside warehouse, Line Roman Caldwell was strapped to a reinforced steel chair, his face bruised, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. Standing in front of him, flanked by 20 heavily armed mercenaries, was Colin Sullivan. Colin was a wiry, nervous man, pacing back and forth with a lit cigarette. "You got sloppy Roman," Colin sneered, blowing smoke into Roman's face. "You let a fat broad run your security, and you got soft. In 10 minutes, I'm going to put a bullet in your head, broadcast it to the families, and take the eastern seaboard." Roman looked up, his ice-blue eyes utterly devoid of fear. He let out a low, dark laugh. "You're a dead man, Colin." "You're not in a position to make threats," Colin snapped, backhanding Roman across the face. "I'm not threatening you," Roman replied, tasting the blood on his lip. "I'm giving you a weather report. You didn't just kidnap me. You pissed her off." Outside, the storm raged, but it was nothing compared to the storm Amelia Hastings brought to the gates. She didn't announce her presence. She didn't negotiate. She utilized the one advantage Colin Sullivan didn't possess: absolute, overwhelming, technological and tactical superiority. Sitting in the passenger seat of the lead SUV, a half-mile from the warehouse, Amelia hacked into the terminal's main power substation. With a single keystroke, she plunged the entire Everett Marine Terminal into pitch blackness. Inside the warehouse, the emergency lights flickered, casting eerie red shadows. "What the hell was that?" Colin yelled his mercenaries, raising their weapons, clicking on their underbarrel flashlights. Then the true nightmare began. Amelia had equipped her Tier 1 strike team with state-of-the-art quad-node, panoramic night vision goggles. To them, the pitch-black warehouse was as bright as day. To Colin's men, they were entirely blind. The heavy steel doors of the warehouse blew open with a deafening crack of C4 explosive. The shockwave knocked 3 of Colin's men off their feet. Before the smoke could clear, suppressed gunfire ripped through the darkness. The mercenaries began dropping one by one precise headshots, dropping them silently into the shadows. Panic erupted. Colin's men fired wildly into the darkness, illuminating the massive space with chaotic muzzle flashes, hitting nothing but rusted shipping containers. "Hold the perimeter," Colin screamed, drawing his own weapon, backing away from Roman. Through the lingering smoke of the breached door, a massive silhouette emerged. Amelia walked into the kill zone. She wasn't running. She wasn't seeking cover. She moved with the slow, terrifying inevitability of a juggernaut. Her heavy tactical vest absorbed a stray round, barely slowing her momentum. She held a heavy M249 squad automatic weapon, a light machine gun that most men had to mount on a bipod to fire accurately. Amelia fired it from the hip. Her immense weight and thick, powerful legs rooted her to the concrete floor, absorbing the violent recoil of the weapon effortlessly. She laid down a devastating, unbroken wall of suppressive fire, chewing through the concrete pillars and shredding the catwalks where Colin's snipers were hiding. "Take her down!" Colin shrieked, pointing at the massive woman marching toward him. 2 mercenaries stepped out from behind a forklift, raising their rifles. Amelia didn't even blink. She shifted her aim, the heavy machine gun, roaring, cutting both men down in less than a second. The psychological impact was more devastating than the bullets. The remaining mercenaries broke. Seeing a woman of her size, heavily armored, shrugging off gunfire and wielding a machine gun like it was a toy, broke their spirit. They dropped their weapons and fled toward the rear exits, only to be apprehended by Johnson and Amelia's perimeter team. Suddenly, the warehouse was dead quiet, save for the patter of rain on the tin roof and the hissing of broken steam pipes. Colin Sullivan was alone. He stood trembling, his gun pointed uselessly at Roman's head. Amelia stopped 20 feet away. She let the heavy machine gun hang on its tactical sling. She reached down, drawing her Sig Sauer P226, the weapon she used with surgical precision. "Drop it, Colin," Amelia said. Her voice wasn't a yell. It was a cold, absolute command that echoed through the cavernous space. "Take one more step, and I paint the floor with his brains," Colin screamed, his hand shaking violently. Amelia didn't take a step. She simply raised her right arm. She didn't aim through the sights. She relied entirely on muscle memory and the absolute, unshakable stability of her thick arm. "You called me soft," Amelia said calmly. Bang! The 9mm round traveled 20 feet and struck the firing mechanism of Colin's handgun with impossible precision, shattering the slide and tearing the weapon violently from his grip. The kinetic force sent Colin spinning to the ground, clutching his broken, bleeding fingers, screaming in agony. Amelia holstered her weapon and walked over to Roman. She pulled a combat knife from her vest and smoothly sliced through the heavy zip ties binding his wrists and ankles. Roman stood up, rolling his shoulders. He didn't look at Colin, who was whimpering on the floor. He looked entirely at Amelia. He saw the soot on her face, the rain soaking her hair, and the magnificent, imposing strength of her heavy frame. "I told you I'd only be 20 minutes, Roman smirked, rubbing his bruised jaw. "You were late, boss," Amelia replied, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. Roman stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her close in front of the surviving members of his syndicate. It was a public, undeniable declaration. "You're never calling me boss again, Amelia. Not after today." He turned his head toward Johnson and the rest of the tactical team who had gathered in the center of the warehouse. They stood at absolute attention. "Colin Sullivan is finished," Roman announced, his voice echoing off the steel walls. "Clean this up, and from this day forward, you do not just answer to me. You answer to her." He looked back at Amelia, his eyes filled with a fiery, unyielding devotion. The woman society had deemed invisible, the woman they had laughed at for her size, had proven she was the most dangerous, brilliant force in the city. "Understood?" Roman asked the room. Johnson bowed his head respectfully. "Understood, boss. Understood, ma'am." Amelia looked out at the men who respected her and the man who loved her unconditionally. She had built her armor out of the world's cruelty, but she no longer needed to hide behind it. She wasn't just a shield anymore. She was the undisputed queen of the underworld. Amelia's story proves that the world's judgments are nothing more than noise. People might look at your size, your background, or your quiet nature and underestimate you. Let them. While they are busy judging you, can be busy building your strength, sharpening your mind, and becoming the undeniable architect of your own empire. Amelia weaponized her invisibility, outsmarted her bullies, and proved that true power doesn't come from fitting into a mold. It comes from having an unbreakable will and a brilliant mind. She didn't just survive the crossfire. She became the queen who controlled it.